I'm gonna try to stay right here if that's okay, and what I have planned is a brief presentation, providing some framing for those of us who may not be as up to speed in terms of the process, some rationale, ultimately after the framing, and then we'll open it up for some questions that you may have, or even statements that you may want to make. Forgive my energy. This unfortunately just happens to be the last one of a series of 10 visits, and it also happens to be right before the board meeting, which is incredibly unfortunate for you all, but the team as well. A good amount of us are going to have to rush back to make sure that we're there for the beginning of the board meeting where this is going to be discussed. I'm, if you're a proud superintendent, I say proudly, pardon the pun, but with this incredible role comes tremendous responsibility and sometimes the burden of making tough decisions, this being one of them. Before I get into the rationale, this specific site is a bit different than others because I feel like the district, even beyond my tenure, but as a superintendent now, it's my duty to accept all responsibility, and I feel like there's been neglect on the district on behalf of the school. And that's just simply unacceptable. However, it is the harsh reality of what we're facing. And there's been some failed attempts in the past. But even that probably just simply contributed to where we are now on a more rapid pace. I know that may not resonate, or maybe it won't be accepted, but I felt like on behalf of the district that I'm representing, I just need to say that. But let me get into what we're hoping to do this afternoon. So I know that I'm a guest here, and Principal Keaton, where are you? I know she's floating around. I was going to ask for permission, but I'm going to ask the same from you all as a guest. Who am I to establish norms of engagement? But I'm going to model these, so I ask if we can all do the same. It'll allow us to get into a productive discussion after the presentation. I will listen with care. In particular, when you all speak, I ask for you all to do the same. We have an incredible team who you're going to. I just called you out just a second ago. Thank you for hosting us. That's all right. That's all right. Let's respect the fact that although some, and I know some because I've seen some faces and some individuals who have gotten to know, who sent some emails, which clearly indicate that they have been well versed in this process. But I also have to assume that there are some who aren't. So we're all in different spaces of understanding in this process, so let's just respect our experiences. And most importantly, let's ask questions. Whether it's related to what could happen or what can happen afterwards in terms of solutions. I'll be modeling those norms as I engage. I'm accompanied with the incredible members of Team DPS. I'm going to have some introduce themselves who are here available, and then I'll do a little poll of everybody else who's in the room.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lemoyne. I'm here representing Exceptional Student Services. If you have questions about IEPs, 504s, gifted and talented, I will be between the multilingual education table at the back and the face table.
Hello, my name is Leticia Jarabi. I'm the Executive Director for Multilingual Education, and we are here to answer any questions that you might have about bilingual education. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lori Kramer. I'm with the Enrollment Services team. We're here to answer any questions about choice, school choice, and enrollment that you might have.
Hello everybody, my name is Esmeralda de la Oliva. I represent Family and Community Engagement, and our team is back there supporting research navigation.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Watson. I'm the Executive Director of HR Strategy and Support Team. I will be in room 121 with my HR business partner. We will be talking to staff about any HR concerns or issues as well as EAP.
Hello, my name is Tyler Navy. I'm with the Department of Transportation.
I'm Dr. Jane Lenneman. I am with the Department of Mental Health and happy to answer any questions around mental health wellness as well as grief and loss.
these individuals will be available for the remainder of this engagement, but we're also accompanied with a tremendous amount of support from Team DPS. Team DPS, please raise your hand. See, we are well represented in this space, so any engagement is welcome for all members, from all members of the team. This is what I refer to in terms of framing. The best way that I can describe it, again, forgive me if I'm not emphasizing or giving its credence in terms of, there's much more on how I'm going to explain this is what I'm saying. So we all have a supervisor if we're employed in Denver Public Schools. Principal Keegan has one, there's several of them in here. Ultimately, it will be me if I provide or ask her to do something via directive, she has a duty to do so. Similarly, for those members of the staff members, there's always a line, a supervisory line. I have one as well. The only difference, the caveat is that it's a body as opposed to a person. The body is the Board of Education. There are 7 duly elected members. So as long as 4 get together, meaning 4 being the quorum, they can direct me. They can't individually, but as a quorum, they can. The mechanism is not verbal, as it could be for any other relationship that exists in Denver Public Schools. We function under policy governance, so it has to be written policy. So for them to direct me as their sole employee, they have to provide it via policy. One of those policies are called executive limitations. Executive limitations are exactly what it sounds like, and the executive, that being me, I'm their sole employee. Limitations meaning, as you try to accomplish this initiative or this task, please stay within these guardrails. Again, that's a very simple way of explaining it, but I think that's the framework that we need so folks can understand, if you don't already, how the board and I engage. How that's important for this gathering is that they, in June, created this policy. We have 18 of them. This executive limitation 18 happens to be the last one they created, which in essence does direct me to address small schools and to right-size the district. So that's the board acknowledging that we have a situation, a crisis that we're trying to avert, and they've said, okay, here's how we want you to try to accomplish it. That is significant because Columbian has been considered for closure in the past. And that was not initiated by the board during that process. That was Team DPS, and I believe Columbian existed on their initial list even before my arrival. I was greeted with a nice list of 19 schools. Columbian was on that list, I remember that. Those processes were initiated by the district, and data analysis and an attempt to just really right-size the district on their own accord. Ultimately, that would have resulted for the board's consideration. Significant difference in this process, because this is originating by the board via their policy request, which means I have to deliver a package. Or back to those supervisory examples that I provided, I would be either insubordinate or derelict in my duty if I chose not to. So I have to deliver a product, right? In doing so, I needed to be thoughtful in the approach. So of course I considered all schools. You all can see that, am I blocking? And apply a criteria, which you'll see in a moment, the criteria. Then we had to really look at regional schools. We have an incredible amount of elementary schools throughout the district. Considering a school like Columbian and comparing that to, let's say, a school in the far northeast does not make sense, right? So we needed to look at regions, and we refer to those in this analysis as clusters. So clusters of schools throughout the city. So then, it's time to make decisions and identify some potential solutions. So using that methodology, I applied the criteria, which you see before you, and it's pretty simple to understand, but incredibly impactful in terms of the outcome that it produces. Green means things are looking great. Yellow, not so much. Red means that we're either in a crisis or heading into a crisis around these criteria. So first, we looked at building use utilization, how much the building is being used. So that means a comparison of how many students are at its maximum versus the actual. Total amount of students is a sustainable enrollment, which is the second one. Then kindergarten class was analyzed, because if you have a robust and a large kindergarten class, that's foundational for sustainable growth in system fusion, right? So that was looked at as well. And also the choice in and choice out patterns, significant data point in this district of choice to see what families are deciding. Lastly, we looked at SPF, which stands for School Performance Framework, which is a rating that the Colorado Department of Ed gives all schools on an annual basis. And although that is part of the criteria, I'm pleased to say that not only in this case, across all the recommendations, it was not the determining factor. The other areas were so significant that it yielded the results for my recommendation. So this criteria and the aforementioned methodology led to this analysis. So this represents the cluster and schools in the region. And when you apply the criteria that I just described, you'll see that Columbian is the clear outlier in all of these areas. I'll leave it up for a second. So only 38% of the building is being used. Only 143 scholars do we have here. A 20-student kindergarten class, assuming that could be one class, maybe it's split, but still 20, which is considerably less than everyone else. And we have 13 families, 13 students who have choiced in. It could be from the same household, but 31 from this region who choiced out. That's also significant when compared to others. And although I said it wasn't a determining factor, you'll see also when it comes to performance that it also is the outlier when it comes to that as well. But those first components of the criteria is so clearly defined in terms of where Columbian is, that led to my decision. I'm gonna, you want to clarify the question?
Yes, yes, clarifying on this slide, because we can't really see it, can you tell us the usage in the building from the other 4 schools?
Sure. So at Bryan Webster, they're at 88%. At Sandoval, 68%. Trevista is at 44%. Beach Court is at 53%, and Centennial is at 60%. So the recommendation is to close Columbian and then create an enrollment zone, very similar to enrollment zones that we have in the district, which will encompass these schools, a lot of the schools that you see on this list, actually every school that you see on this list. So that would incorporate Centennial, Beach Court, Trevista, Edison, and so forth. This is the map, I'm sorry. So everything reflected in the green. So that's a framing that I wanted to provide. I also feel compelled to share the financial burden, and again, that the district has to hold the responsibility when it comes to it, because to the tune of, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of staffing, I'm trying to get HR's attention. 17, and that's classroom teachers, yes? And the overall budget is here around 3 million, yes? So I think 800 is a 600, somewhere between $600,000 to $700,000 this past year. The district has supported Columbia. It's a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not saying that that was done with regret. We graciously did it. We've done it for 3 years. I think 3 years we've done over $1 million, close to $1.5 million of budget assistance and small school subsidy. The unfortunate reality is that the money that we graciously put into the system, and this is why I said, like, we could have done more than just giving the money, right? Because the money always has an expiration. And this is common across all the schools, because all the schools was depending on some of that assistance. What's significantly different here is that you all have been consistently named on these lists that we put out, right? So I feel like we could have maybe done a little bit more, I hate to say aggressive, but maybe aggressive in either recruitment, aggressive in terms of repurposing, aggressive in terms of actual closure, instead of it just lingering. Because what has happened is those funds expired September 30th. Those are the funds that we received from the federal government because of COVID relief funds. So those of us who were here, remember all the masking that we did, the infiltration, making sure that we had personal protective equipment, the PPE. A good amount of that money was earmarked for that. Another component of that money was supposed to accelerate the learning. Remember learning loss, those terminologies that were being used widely across the nation. Then we were allowed to use to our discretion as long as they went straight to the school. And that was the funds that we used for schools like Columbian, where at Columbian, you all were allowed to continue as you are as a staff because of those resources. So this is what is so painful that, and I've learned that maybe this comes off the rec, but I've been asked, at least in the last 3 sessions, to say it clearly, because I have a duty to. The board is voting on Columbian and all of these schools that I'm considering in a couple of hours. Columbian will look incredibly different next year, regardless of what the board decides. Meaning if the board does not accept the recommendation, which they can, you all who've been here have been part of that already. When I've said we should consider this, they said no, it's their prerogative. The problem is that what's different this year versus those is that $700,000 doesn't exist. So that means that translates to over a dozen educators. And we just calculated potentially 17 classroom teachers. So it's gonna look significantly different. And what's so scary about that is this is painful. I think you can hear it in my voice, and I'm not saying that I'm sharing the same pain that you all are repeatedly. What I'm saying is that it's difficult for me to try to support knowing that I cannot. So this to me is the necessary approach, because what could happen next year is devastating for staff, devastating for families. I mean that if we're engaging, expecting to come to Columbia, and then we cannot have the appropriate ratio. That's how we do operational closures and snow days. Some think it's just weather related. No, it's because there's call outs, and we cannot legally have, just like when you go on trips, you have to have the appropriate ratio. When you don't have the supervisory ratio of adults to students, it's a hard closure immediately. And what happens then is teachers have absolutely no guarantee. So no employment overnight. And similarly, or even worse, families now, instead of having choice, like in this proposal, where you have guaranteed placement in any school and also transportation in any one of these schools, now we simply just give you some vacancies somewhere in DPS, and hopefully you can take your child there. That to me is devastating. So as painful as this process is, and it is, and difficult, that reality, and I hate to say it because it's not even probable, it will happen, scares me deeply. So that's my recommendation, and wish we could have done better, not only for Columbian as a system. And if someone has a question, how did we get here? My theory is that we, at one point, built a whole lot of schools in rapid succession. And there was no plan on what would happen if we didn't have the amount of students that we had at our peak 10 years ago when we were at 93,000 students. Thank you. Questions?
Well, I have a series of questions, but I'd have to say all the new schools that were built way back when in the head, weren't those charter schools?
They were, most of them.
Okay, most of them were charter schools, so that's a big distinction between some of the other district schools. But in 2022, there was a long period of time for community involvement to get out, and there was a community citizen committee, and there was tremendous pushback, which is why a lot of the schools, you closed like 3 schools. Okay, here you were going into a meeting in an hour, and we're sitting here. And you came up with the list on the 7th, and now there's an hour before. So there's no time for these hardworking families, these hardworking staff members to really get together and say, what is it? Do we really want to rally? How can we rally? You didn't provide that opportunity, and why is that? Why did you choose to eliminate our voices?
Thank you for your question. You are right in terms of the OB expansion, not exclusively, but the majority of them were charters. To your question, this was not done with any malice. The Board of Education's executive implementation says very clearly that I need to produce a solution set of schools by November. It also says that the Board of Education needs to vote on said package by November. This is important because this is going to answer the time frame and how condensed some feel that it is. The board engages 3 times per month, one of which is just public comment, meaning there isn't any action that the board takes. So it's really 2 opportunities. One in the beginning of the month, and one towards the end of the month. So naturally, my response was, at the beginning of the month, November 7th, here's your list. And also naturally, the only opportunity was today, the last board meeting that's already scheduled a year in advance. So although it may come off circumstantial, that's the reality. The 2 dates in November determined the list and also when you can engage. In terms of what today is, there are 10 schools. And our team did incredible work trying to schedule, so thank you. But also, the EL calls for the board to engage on their own, which they did last week, and then for me to engage. So although it's an hour, and again, there's no response that I can tell you that will make you feel better. You have every right. I feel uncomfortable with this. But there was always going to be one school on Monday and one school on Thursday. And you all are on Thursday.
Well, and then that goes to my question though. This school was on the list, and as were the other 10 in 2022. So really, you've had since 2022 to have a lot of community input and to sit down and say, what are we going to do to change the situation before I have to deal with these issues again, before I have to come up with that list? So what was done on behalf of the district, not on the school, to improve enrollment, to make those changes? What was done? It's not clear to me.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. The 10 schools were not necessarily on the list before. We have seen some schools, no, it's an important piece because that came up in another school's conversation, that they're attributing being on the list for the sole reason why they're potentially going to close. And it's an unfair conclusion to make because there have been several schools. There was a list of 19, then there was a list of 16, and in certain cases, those schools actually increased enrollment. Right, so some will refer to it as a scarlet letter or a death sentence. It's terrible terminology, but that's what they've said. And it's unfair to just categorize it that way. In terms of what we've done, here is one example. I've contracted with a group who has done miraculous work across the nation that is performance-based, meaning we didn't pay a penny unless they can actually produce a student that was never enrolled in Denver Public Schools. And then because of their hard work, door knocking recruitment, now they're in Denver Public Schools. That yielded less than a dozen students. And here's why. We simply have less students. Declining birth rates at a record low. Gentrification is real. And in particular in this neighborhood, I used to live in this neighborhood years ago. So those 2 factors, there aren't the bodies there. And we have too many facilities. So the harsh reality as a district, we had to do some sort of condensing.
Okay, I have just one more question because I don't want to be the only one asking questions, and I realize I have an awful lot of questions. But so if you look at the list, most of them have a 75% or higher Hispanic, with like a 10% higher African American, with the exception of Palmer, which was like 52% white. I just, that is a really hard statistic to hear and to look at when you also see all the schools that there is a tremendous amount of segregation happening in Denver public schools. And this action alone is going to impact that. I mean, there is a study that says 70% of white students go to predominantly white schools with, with no free lunch or, so that's harsh, and needs to be addressed. So I guess if you're gonna close these, what are you gonna do to kind of change that along the process? So 3 years from now, we're not sitting here watching you close the next group of highly, Hispanic or African-American schools.
Thank you, and I agree, incredibly hard.
Sorry, I won't ask you.
A couple of points there in terms of how to respond. One is the board acknowledged the fact that we could be causing additional harm in historically marginalized communities. It's embedded in the executive limitation. Hence, since you mentioned school, why Palmer is on the list. Okay. In terms of the solution, well, the reality, before I get into the solution, is that the gentrification issue and the density in terms of how many schools we have versus bodies are regional, and they happen to be in communities where students, families of color live. This area in particular, heavily in the Southwest, where there's a tremendous amount of schools represented in the package. This is how we plan to address via the enrollment zone. Because although those statistics that you mentioned are the makeup of this school, it's not the case when you look at other schools in this enrollment zone, in particular Centennial. So the enrollment zone is to diversify our existing schools moving forward. Thank you.
What's gonna stop you from closing the school? Because it seems like absolutely nothing. The school has been on the closure list for the past 2 years. You guys keep throwing us out there, And how do you expect us to move up when you guys keep putting this pressure on all of us families, all of us as a community? We've had 3 new principals in 1 year. We've lost so many teachers because you guys can't leave us alone. Our small schools have little numbers, but they make a big impact on all of our lives. So that's the question. What's gonna stop you guys from closing our schools?
Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that. I don't mean that facetiously. Here is the dilemma that the district is faced in. That we are running an ineffective system.
Yeah, you are.
No, we are, not in the way that you're alluding to.
But
We're
why
heading
is it
to a
taking
crisis. We're heading to a crisis. This school, and yes, all those factors contribute to the realities of where we are
But
now.
all this help in this room, and you guys are barely coming here to help us? All of these tables you have set up, all of these people that are here to help us, and you're barely now bringing them to the school to come help us when you're already probably in the back of your mind made up your decision of what to do with our school? Where is all this on-set help when we needed it 2 years ago?
So, I understand the frustration. I'm not gonna pretend as if I'm in the same space that you are. But the solution are students. It's not the folks who are in the perimeter of this room. I've already cut central office at a record amount. When I first arrived, it was a very bloody reorganization that had 80 folks who were in central office no longer working in central office. It yielded $9 million in savings. $9 million that I graciously put and repurposed for our staff members. That's what we were able to settle that contract back then. I can't cut more because our schools are already saying, to your point, that we are not being supportive enough. Meaning that I perhaps cut too deeply back then.
Or just be here. You keep talking about money. Why don't you guys be here? Physically and emotionally, now all of a sudden you have all of these resources for us. That's what I'm saying. You keep going back to money. And what about our community? What about getting together with the parents, with the teachers, and keeping us here? When Benita was running our school, we didn't have a lot of funding, but she and all the office the office staff and all of the faculty that we did have here at that moment, they put stuff together to get us the funding that we needed to do for our school, for our after school. You guys weren't funding our after school. Our school was funding our after school program for our kids.
I understand. So, when Benita was here, perhaps you all were funding that specific program, but I can assure you that we were funding close to 40% of the staff at that time. So it's ultimately, I hate to say it, about numbers, but it's about students. Us being here will be helpful, but it doesn't solve the issue. Students is what we need in here, and we don't have them. We've attempted to get them. They're not around. They have a choice in. So students are the solution, and they're not in Columbine and all other parts of Denver. We have considerably less students than we had when we needed all these schools. So it's not money, it's students actually bring the money, because that's how we're funded as a school.
Okay, and as far as the school choice thing, I'll tell you one thing, I've moved 3 times in the past 2 years, and my kids have been going to Columbine since my son was in preschool 1, and he's now 8 years old. So, you know, that should say something, that should tell you about our school and what we got going on here. The school of choice doesn't matter.
I appreciate it. Yes?
I think she asked, what can we do to stop the school from closing? Which there's a vote in like 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours. What's the answer?
Well, no,
Is there an answer?
the answer is that this continues to be my recommendation. Because this is how I am being responsive to, again, the directive provided by the board to me. So this is how I'm responding to the homework assignment.
So you're closing.
I'm
That's
recommending the closure, the
That's
board
your
has to
answer.
decide.
You're closing.
That will be my recommendation, the board has to decide that.
There you go. That's the answer.
So the decision's already made?
I don't make the decision, I make the recommendation. My recommendation is closure.
Your decision for your recommendation is already made, that's already done.
My recommendation is for closure, yes, for Columbine.
Because our numbers aren't high enough, if we do that, they're really hard enough. And we're trying to keep them here in the school. Here,
And they're improving.
here.
I'm sure they are,
We're a
and I'm sure
blended
they
family.
will.
Our oldest son has moved schools in the past 3 years, 3 different schools, and this is the one that he feels the most comfortable to where he could actually learn. He feels that he's getting the help that he finally needs and deserves, and you guys wanna take it away. You wanna take it away. The Board of Education, are they all in this room right now?
No,
No, exactly. Why? Why is that?
they were here last week.
So
In
why are
part-
you guys coming to our school now?
I believe you missed the framing that we
Years of
did.
this.
I know, I understand, and I understand this is frustrating to hear, so forgive me, this is not me trying to be combative in any way. I believe you missed when I presented on why your questions, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, I provided the answers to it. So the board engaged first, I engaged second, then ultimately the board considers, and November dates are critical, because the assignment that I was given asked me to deliver November, and also for them to decide November.
Shouldn't you guys all be here for these important conversations?
The executive session says that it's them on their own, which they were here last week. Don't know if you were part of that conversation. And then me. So that was all written out.
Yeah, okay, but, you know, for some of the families that come here, coming here to meet you guys when you want to on your terms is a little difficult sometimes, so excuse me for not being here for the first 2 times, but I feel like if that's your guys' job as superintendent, as Board of Education, you guys should be here every single time.
I agree. It's
So
also,
you're gonna go and tell the Board of Education how it went to you in your eyes, and then you guys make a decision off of that, is what's happening?
well, the board also engaged, so they have their own thoughts. I do not know what they're going to decide. So again, they had their own engagements, and they were impacted the way that they were impacted. remember that this has happened before, and they've decided not to. I feel like I have a duty to tell you what I am going to do, which I have already. My recommendation for this school will be to close based on the figures and the realities of Columbia. I can't speak on it. I don't know what they're going to do.
So my recommendation to help our school instead of close our school, because to you, it's helping because of the money and the students or whatever. But to the community, to the school, it's not helping none of us. And the schools that you recommend, who says that we're gonna put our kids there? If we wanted our kids there, they would be at this school.
So I do feel that this recommendation is going to help the scholars in Columbia long term. And this is where I believe that we may have differing opinions. And I don't want to keep going back to resources, right? Because the experience that you have mentioned and that you adore here will not be the same next year here. No, I realize that. I understand that it may be difficult to post process. So the Colombian that you love and adore will not be the Colombian that you love and adore September. It will not. There's a very good chance that it just simply won't continue to function. So for that reason, I had to consider that. And this is my solution.
So, going back to, you talked about the utilization of spaces in the other 4 schools. I'll use my teacher voice, I'm joking. Thank you. So you talked about, percentage of space being used, but do you actually have numbers of how many students are currently there in those other 4 schools?
Yes, that's the second column. You want me to read them out as well?
Yes, would you please?
At Bryan Webster, it's a K-8, so to be a fair compare, well, it's 650-ish students. 143 here, 318 at Sandoval, 388 at Teresa, 218 at Beach Court, and just shy of 400 at Centennial.
And can I ask, I think Edison is within our boundaries, why isn't Edison up?
Edison is,
Was I, yeah, Edison
Right-
is in
right
that
there.
zone.
it's,
But I don't see Sandoval in that zone.
what is the total enrollment? It should be on the slide there at 537.
Okay. And so I guess my follow-up question to that is, when all of this first started happening a couple of weeks ago, with your recommendation, we've had at least 3 families I know of that tried to move. I think one tried to go to Centennial and one tried to go to Edison, and I'm not sure about the third one. And they were told they are full. They could not go ahead and make the transfer now. So can you speak to that? If that's going to be the case moving forward when our students try to move and choice in to these schools, and they're told they're full, how is that gonna be a choice for our students?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Great question. What I can assure you is that every school mentioned in this enrollment zone will have ample space for every student in Columbia. The difference is that I'm referring to the choice enrollment window, which opens up in a month, right? That's when we start doing projections. Right now, unless it's a hardship transfer, it is an automatic no. So that's the reason why. It's just the timing.
But it doesn't necessarily mean they're full, so why are they saying?
Well,
If they can say an automatic no without even a reason, why are they saying we're full?
They shouldn't say that. I think that could be their way of explaining that they've already set, it's very similar to what happens here. Those leaders, October count, maybe familiar with October count, critical time where we freeze, even though student population fluctuates well beyond that. That's when they set the schedule program and then it stays put. Maybe, I have no, it's actually the wrong way for them to reject. They shouldn't say that. But I would guess that that's their way of saying, okay, we already have our schedule set in our class sizes. But this recommendation is not for immediate, because what would happen if students start to, and families start to, if they were allowed to, or they actually do pull them out and go elsewhere, then this process that I'm alluding to, the potential outcome, starts to really accelerate.
Oh, sorry. For special education, schools weren't allowed to turn special education students away. And I think that's probably still the case. How do we know, how can you guys ensure that families won't be turned away the same way sped? Is it like, you couldn't even ask for IEPs or any of those kinds of things when your children were trying to choose into a building?
Yeah, so I'm surprised that that is even the case because they can't turn them away. Lori, do you mind speaking about priority and choice and also the services? Thank you.
Can I ask for clarification? I think you might be asking, are you asking about IEPs or are you asking about students coming out of Columbian?
I'm worried about students in general that are trying to choose into another school, and I've been around for a long time, but yet admin, there's somebody saying, we would rather have a different, I worry about biases.
Okay. So for families to participate in round 1 and round 2 of school choice, we prefer round 2. It's your best opportunity to get the seats that you desire. Our system is automated and it knows who all the students are and it knows where they're coming from. And so students who are currently in K through 4 at Columbian will have closing school priority on their applications for all of their schools, which is our highest choice priority in DPS schools. And so schools through choice don't have an opportunity to turn people away. They may have an opportunity to not take any more kids, but they can't skip a student to go to the next student. It's not how the system works. The system doesn't allow them to do it.
Quick follow-up to that. ECE students, so like my current ECE student will be going to kinder, but also we have a 3-year-old program here. So how do you deal with that?
So ECE is not guaranteed in the district in general, and so because of that, the current ECE students will not be eligible for the closing school priority. However, if there are siblings applying together, our system works really hard through something called family link, which is very technical, and I won't get into it, but to keep those siblings together, we work very hard on also a human level to keep siblings together. ECE students will apply, and if they reside in the enrollment zone and they're applying to an enrollment zone school, they'll get that priority for the enrollment zone over someone who doesn't live in the enrollment zone.
Well, I apologize if I missed it, because I came in a little late, but, so for me, I came to Columbia as a kid, and I brought my kids through Columbia. I got priced out of the neighborhood, so we moved, but I drive her to Columbia every day. If this school closes, are we not gonna be able to do any DPS schools, because we're not even in the district? How does that work?
Oh, great. You want to rehash the priority?
So you have a student who currently attends Columbian. In what grade? Third grade, okay. Closing school priority will apply to your student just like it would to any other student. We don't differentiate between in-district, out-of-district, in the zone, out of the zone. We understand that your education, her education is being interrupted, and we want to give you every opportunity to get into other schools regardless of where you live.
And final question to that, like some parents, like myself, we did this, drive her here for the pride of it. Now that it's gone, you guys factored in the kids who are just gonna get out of DPS? Or that makes this problem worse?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's been a common question across the schools and the parents that we've engaged with. We do realize that there will be some attrition. So yes, in a perfect world, we will absorb all the students. That's not gonna happen, so you're absolutely right about that. However, this year in particular, we've seen a trend that we haven't seen, I would say, either ever or in the foreseeable recent history of DPS, where we have more students from out of district, meaning Douglas County, Jeffco, and so forth, coming into the district as opposed to leaving. So this year, we've seen a trend that folks around the metro area are choosing DPS. So we are banking on that reality.
So we hope to Columbia up again, people wanna come here?
So that's a great question. And actually, interesting, out of all the engagements, I was expecting a question like that, and that hasn't been presented until right now. So the question was, if folks come on in and we have a need for a school, we open it up again. The answer is very probable, right? Because the last phase of this, let's say if the board does accept the recommendation, then we'll know that this school will close. It will not be a school the way that we see it now for next year. But before then, I'm asked to come back, team, to engage with you all to see what you would like this space to be. Meaning we won't sell the building. It will still be a DPS facility. And at that point, we can explore what it is, right? Some of the common requests have been daycare centers, ECEs, things that will not require major shifts to just outfitting the building. And I believe that that's safe. I'm not saying that that's what you all will like, because at that point, that can easily grow right back into any school and any grade level at that capacity, right? I want to acknowledge, although we're forecasting a decline, we were surprised this past year with 4,000 new to country students, right? So in that case, that actually did save some schools from being recommended. Unfortunately, it didn't save, because even if you did accept, not to the tune of something that would have made a significant difference in terms of the total tally of enrollment of students in this building. So in anticipation of the fact that we do not know, also looking at potentially what's going to come down the pipe from the federal government, we do not know. So there's a sense of uncertainty when it comes to just the political landscape. We have our statistical analysis that we rely on and has been proven to be the more accurate compared to the other entities who've done their own, in particular Denver Housing Authority and other organizations who've done their own analysis. We've been a little bit more accurate. However, that does potentially allow this school and all the others for that matter to reemerge in a different way.
Sorry, it's just me again. I just think that not everyone, perhaps in this room, is aware, and I think for some of the parents, is that all of the new schools that were added, which are predominantly with charters, and those charters cannot be closed. And they're gonna say, oh, 2 did close on their own, so good for them, yay, yay. But charters also have accepted tremendous amounts of money from, Bezos' ex-wife, the Walton family, the Billionaires Club, has totally supported charters. So they keep going, and so that's an issue where you're taking the non-charter schools and they start closing. At some point in time, you're going to have to deal with that. And this is not the only city that's faced with this problem. All the people that started the big charter, Philadelphia, all of them, it's the same problem that keeps happening. And as the superintendent, it is your responsibility to make sure that that's dealt with and to make sure that these communities are dealt with in a more equitable way. It's, this is not good. This is not good.
I couldn't agree with
It's heartbreaking. It's a sign of what's happening in our country. And it's, segregation should not be a word that comes up in our society right now.
Again, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we as a district, again, overexpanded, and certain type of governance models in particular. And then again, that was then, and you can argue that there was need for that. A lot of the folks here weren't around during that time. What I can say is that it's a shared responsibility. Yes, I have the burden of being the recommender of a lot of controversial decisions, this being one. But ultimately, the Board of Education is the one who accepts it, just like potentially what's going to happen now. The charter renewal process happens on an annual basis. Also, new charters per Colorado law, meaning even in spite, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I can see that you're recording this, so I'm going to say very, very firmly, right? Is that even though we are clearly in a crisis when it comes to enrollment, if a charter network or a charter school decides to apply, we have to, by law, consider that application. To me, that's ridiculous. But again, I would be and subordinates. And then I have to make a recommendation, and if you check historically, they've all been denials. And it goes before the board, and the board ultimately decides. That burden is truly on the Board of Education. I share a portion of it. Think we have time for one more? This gentleman?
And this is just clarification for me. On the night that the school, that you made your recommendation to the Board of Education to close the schools, was there not a meeting also that night when 5 different charter schools were recommended, all of them, even though one of them has an enrollment of, I believe, less than 200 students to be renewed?
Yes, there was. And in that annual renewal process that I mentioned earlier, it's based on a criteria that's predetermined, and it's mostly, if not exclusively, on performance, and it purposely says that we cannot consider enrollment. Another tremendous point of frustration.
Yes, you can see how that's frustrating to somebody who's being told that our enrollment is low, to see us like that. Thank you for clarifying.
I will go with this gentleman, and then I'm gonna take off.
I just want to say, like, we just need to make sure all these resources, like, that we have here today, no matter what the, future holds, we provide those to the students. Like, this really, like, impacts me deeply. I went through the same thing my freshman year. I was at Manual High School with Superintendent Michael Bennett. We were promised, like, all these things and, follow up after that situation. And literally, we were given a laptop and a bus pass. There was no follow up all throughout, high school. There was talks about, like, honorary diplomas, just for them to turn around and reopen the school, a few years later. So it's like, none of those people who were displaced had a sense of belonging, especially people, who were close to finishing the diploma. So it's like, we need to follow up with those students no matter what, and just make sure that we're supporting them, and just really, like, put students first, because it impacts them, like, a whole lot.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that. The team actually appropriately, in terms of transition point, are going to remain to engage, to ensure that we can not only honor that, but also so you can see very clearly our intent in terms of providing those supports. Columbian, forgive me on many, many, many fronts. The fact that I have to leave to go to the board meeting, but also the fact that this is on the 11th hour, and that this is my recommendation. It's not something that I'm excited to do, but I feel that I have to, morally, but also as a superintendent who has to be responsible to the board. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Marrero. As you said, the central office team is going to be sticking around, and we're able to answer questions, we're able to hear your concerns. We'll actually be back here in early December, and so if we're not able to answer a question now,